Nate, do you feel like Charles and Ferrari can close the gap this weekend?
Maybe not necessarily this weekend, but I think that they should feel a lot better about their chances now that Charles has got that win. And it does seem like a lot of points, but all it takes is one race where Verstappen doesn't finish and Charles wins, and suddenly that's a really small lead that he's got. So while we're in that kind of margin of error, I think they're in a good position. You're right about the tyre issue here last year. They really struggled last year, Ferrari, at this event. And but I think that the key for them at these weekends is if we're losing to Max, we have to make sure we're finishing second to him. Make sure that it's it's a small gain that he's getting and keep him in that kind of that retirement window if they can move forward. But this weekend might be a stretch. But I mean, for the championship's sake, I hope it's not. I hope that Ferrari can make a huge gain here and keep it interesting, because going to the summer break is when, if there's a huge gap at the front, you kind of go into the summer break a little bit deflated. We've obviously got Hungary after this race, but you can kind of get a sense of where the championship is at that point.
Laurence, do you feel like there's still tension possibly within Ferrari's team, or do you think that they've moved past that going into France?
Yeah, I feel like there was a bit of tension after the sprint race in Austria, because there was a situation where you had the two Ferrari drivers behind Max Verstappen. Obviously, Charles Leclerc is the closest to him in the championship, so was trying to catch up with him. But at the same time, he was facing a challenge from Carlos Sainz's teammate, who's even further back in the championship. And we saw how much Red Bull would prioritize Verstappen over Perez. We saw that in Spain. Perez was asked to move over to let Verstappen take the victory. And you feel like if Ferrari are going to close this gap in the Drivers' Championship, at least, they're going to have to orchestrate it a bit. At times when Charles is struggling a little bit, they're going to maybe have to ask Carlos to support him rather than attack him. And so I feel like there's a little bit of unease there, not least because Charles Leclerc could have an extra, I worked it out the other day on kind of a rough estimate, about another 72 points had he not had problems with his strategy, problems with reliability over recent races. And it really happened in this concentrated block of 5 races. So, there was a time when we were 3 races into the season in Australia and Charles Leclerc had won 2 of the first 3 races, and Max Verstappen had 2 retirements, and Leclerc was over 30 points ahead. And we were all saying, well, maybe this championship's over already. Of course, it wasn't. It went back the other way. So, yeah, I feel like Leclerc is just looking to his team and saying, like, look, if we're going to really challenge Max, who we know gets it right so often, is so difficult to beat at the best of times, he feels like he's going to need the full support. And I feel like there's certain races, Silverstone springs to mind, Monaco springs to mind, the strategy hasn't been there for Leclerc to maximize his performance. And I think that was what created a little bit of tension. And then when they went wheel to wheel in Austria and Max disappeared into the distance, which again was roughly what Toto Wolff was talking about in that quote, it just kind of stuck a little bit then as well. But of course, the victory on Sunday for Leclerc was a big step forward. We saw Red Bull really struggle with their tyres. Clearly, I think they got something wrong with the setup. They were the anomaly. It wasn't that all of a sudden Ferrari found pace. I don't think it was just all of a sudden Red Bull was off the pace. So the thing about that is that teams often learn from those mistakes. So Red Bull clearly made some kind of setup error in Austria. They will probably understand that by now, and they'll be able to play that through and figure out how to not repeat it at the future races. And so I think if Ferrari feel like they got a little bit of ground back, it only converted to 6 points in the Drivers' Championship. And really, they're going to have to push again and make sure they're absolutely 100% perfect to beat Max at a race like the French Grand Prix.
Okay, so if you take all of that into consideration, strategy, performance, reliability, who does this track suit better, Nate, Ferrari or Red Bull?
I'd still say Red Bull at this point. I think Laurence is right about the anomaly of last weekend. Ferrari struggled here last year. And I mean, those last 2 points you mentioned, reliability and strategy, we know aren't really the strongest things for Ferrari right now. I think that engine issue for Sainz is going to be something that we're talking about coming into the weekend and just going forward generally. It's not the sort of thing you want to see happen for a team that's chasing the championship. So I'd say Red Bull.
Okay. Well, you look outside the top 4 of Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, and Carlos Sainz. You have both the Mercedes drivers in 5th and 6th. George, as we know, has been Mr. Consistent the entire year outside of his DNF at Silverstone. But Lewis, I think we can agree, has gotten faster and faster with each week. This French track is very similar to Silverstone, where Mercedes thought that they possibly could have been the second quickest on the grid that weekend. So, Laurence, is this a weekend we could finally see Lewis Hamilton get a win?
Yeah, I think for a long time, Mercedes were aiming at this race as one to make a breakthrough, because in Spain, they Border-Brig update, which solved a lot of their early season problems. Then they went to tracks with bumps and they struggled with different issues. Then they kind of got their head around that. And then they went to Silverstone and they felt they were going to be competitive. But they had their eyes a little bit on the French Grand Prix as one where maybe they could really take the fight to Red Bull and Ferrari. I still think on the basis of what we saw at the last two races in Austria and Silverstone, sure, they made steps, but they haven't quite completely closed the gap. So it's going to require something a little bit strange to happen. But as I was talking about earlier, 40-degree heat, that is really, really hot. And we've seen that the Mercedes has struggled sometimes to get the tyres turned on for a single lap. So that's why we've often seen them struggle a bit in qualifying relative to race pace. But the counter side to that is that over race, they can just eke the life out of those tyres. It's a little bit easier on the tyres of the car when it's set up properly, which they've struggled with a few times. But if they can find that setup, that sweet spot, you kind of feel that with a little bit of strategy, even if they're starting fourth or fifth, they might just be able to work their way back into the race. I think a victory against, Charles and Max when they're on their top form with no problems is probably a step too far. But yeah, there's a little bit of hope there for Mercedes.
I think Katie just wanted a yes there, didn't you, Katie? That was a straight up yes, Lewis can win. I could feel that.
I didn't quite get it, but he said maybe if something happens. Sometimes I am rooting for all hell to break loose up front so that Lewis can gain a couple of positions. Alas, I'm not always rooting for that, but just sometimes.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.